All right. Hello? Yep. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're Xano, and we're here to discuss how you can take your no-code app from prototype to Powerhouse. So my name is Michael Udinski. I'm the developer advocate lead at Xano.
And I am Liz. I'm the developer community manager at Xano, and we are super excited to be here today to talk about scaling. So let's cover what the agenda is going to look like for today. So we are going to be going over an introduction to Xano. We'll do an introduction to scaling as well for those of you who are not familiar. We'll talk about the different types of scaling as well. And we're going to dive into what needing to scale looks like. We're also going to talk about some of the strategies that you can use to scale both proactively and reactively.
Awesome. So I know there's some people familiar with Xano. Some of you may have heard of us. Some people might be hearing about us for the very first time. So just wanted to give a little primer before we kind of jump into the meat of the presentation. So first and foremost, our mission is to empower anyone to create scalable world-class software, hence the topic today. Now, to paint a better picture, this is somewhat of a simplified graphic, but in software today, there's two pieces. The front end being everything that, I keep hitting this, the front end that is everything your user sees and interacts with. And then there's also the back end, which is all the logic behind the scenes. Now, this also includes the server that powers your app, the database that stores all your content, and the API, which is a messenger between your back end and front end. So what Xano does is the entire back end. So we deploy a powerful single tenant server, have a flexible real-time database, and give you a way to create those APIs with no code. So at Xano, we're 100% back-end focused. In our DNA are scaling best practices in our infrastructure. So we use Docker to containerize every instance and deploy that single tenant instance, Kubernetes to help orchestrate scaling, PostgreSQL database, and all hosted on the Google Cloud. And it's okay if you don't know what those technologies necessarily mean. There's more information on our website as well if you're curious. But we like to say if you can trust the same infrastructure that Google uses for scaling, you should be able to trust Xano's. Now at the bottom, you'll see some compliance badges. We're constantly going through penetration tests and audits in order to accomplish some of these that you see on the screen here, including GDPR, which I know is very important in Europe, but we're forever expanding this portfolio as well. Last but not least, I'll say we are no code first, but also have developer-friendly features. These may or may not become important as you do reach more scale and growth. For example, we're able to sidecar in Docker microservices to interact with that no-code API builder. If you don't want to query in a no-code way and you're comfortable with SQL, you can write direct SQL queries, connect directly to the Postgres database, insert JavaScript with Lambda functions, Redis caching. And on our enterprise plans, you can self-host. This becomes important for larger organizations who might have certain compliance needs in their own environment. Awesome. So that was a little about Xano, but let's jump into scaling. So what is scalability? This refers to the ability of an application to handle and accommodate an increased amount of growth, which could be load, work, data, or users. Why is this important? Well, it's a critical attribute for applications. As businesses expand, scalability addresses your app's ability to respond to that increased demand and its reliability.
So what are the different types of scaling? As Michael mentioned, Postgres allows us to scale both horizontally and vertically. Vertical scaling, you can kind of think about it as enhancing the server's resources like CPU and memory, while horizontal scaling is adding more servers to your infrastructure.
Awesome. So to expand on vertical scaling, or oftentimes referred to as scaling up, this is increasing the power of that server. This could be adding more CPU, RAM, increasing storage capacity. You can think of it like upgrading the horsepower to your car. The primary advantage of vertical scaling is its simplicity, right? You're just increasing that power. You're not changing necessarily the architecture of your application. Now, while scaling up can boost performance, it's important to know that as you are getting a more powerful server, you're generally paying for that to increase its limits.
And then in the other hand, we have horizontal scaling or scaling out, which involves adding more machines to your pool of resources. So you can kind of think about it like a train. We would be adding more carts to that train. And this method is essential for handling more traffic because it distributes the load across multiple servers. It basically allows our application to maintain performance under higher loads. And it is also scalable beyond that single server's capacity.
So what does needing to scale look like? So let's use an example of an e-commerce application. Your users can register, select their favorite products in stores, browse their favorites, ultimately place orders for in-stock items.
And in our example here of this e-commerce application, the type of things that we would need to manage are like user preferences, product details, and inventory levels. So as we take this example and we start to consider that our application is starting to grow and our user base is also growing, the volume of requests to retrieve information is also increasing, right? So this is multiplying the load on our database because we're demanding it to fetch more information from multiple tables very quickly, which with each new user and each transaction, our system is continuously being pushed to manage more complex queries and provide those real-time updates to our application. This is going to lead to higher load, and particularly during those times, like if we were to have a sale or a promotion, we are going to see more demand there. So how can we detect these loads, right? How do we know that they are happening? So let's start by looking at this instance usage monitoring. One of the most powerful tools at your disposal is going to be the instance dashboard in Cieno. Looking at this graph, this is going to monitor our server's resources, right? So this dashboard is going to be our first line of defense against any potential overloads. We do recommend that you're continuously monitoring this and checking for usage spikes. Ideally, you want to keep the server's capacity below 50%. And we say this number because that ensures that you have sufficient overhead to handle any unexpected surges in demand without impacting your user's experience, right? So next up, let's talk about some visual cues that you can look at when looking at this graph right here. So we're going to pay special attention to the database and the API usage. If these two are consistently high, it is a clear signal of potential inefficiencies in our application. So this could mean that our database isn't necessarily optimized, or maybe it's not indexed properly, right? So kind of moving on to interpreting these user metrics. When we're taking a look at this and we see that the database usage is high, anything when this is high, this is kind of signaling that we are processing more data than what our current setup can handle effectively, right? So this is a cue for us to start looking at indexing and database optimization. Usually when API usage is high, same with database usage. They kind of go hand in hand. So we want to take a look at that. And once we apply some fixes in that, both of those should go down at the same time. But when it comes to the API traffic here, and it is isolated usage, right? If we see that that's the only thing that is high, we really need to pay attention to that because these spikes are signaling that there is higher demand than usual. And that is our cue to start looking into scaling up to maintain performance and reliability. So going back to our e-commerce application here, in this scenario, this application is currently running on Cieno's launch plan. And we've noticed that API usage is peaking between 40 and 80% during those high traffic times. So this is going to guide our decision to scale. Now, when taking a look at this, some things that you may be wondering is this bad? Should we go ahead and just upgrade? Or what path should we take based on this information?
All right, so what does that high usage mean? So our server resources are being heavily utilized, as just talked about. This could be a number of things that increase traffic, probably higher throughput, intensive logic, just to name a few things. What are the potential consequences if this high usage goes unchecked? Well, increased response times, right? If the server struggles to manage all those incoming requests, users might experience slower API responses. Um, Potential request failures. So if you completely max out your server, that can lead to outright request failures. Ultimately, all this would lead to user dissatisfaction, which we don't want, which could ultimately impact your business. Now, deciding between upgrading or improving. Now, one point I do want to make is when it comes to development, whether that's traditional or in a no-code space, it's going to be an iterative process. You should always be looking for areas of improvement and optimization. But in the example of our e-commerce application, maybe this question comes up when we see this high usage spike, right? Should we upgrade our resources, or is there potential to optimize our app's functionality? One important factor when making that decision is to analyze response times of our APIs in Xano and our functions in Xano.
Absolutely. So optimizing API request is going to be crucial for improving your application's performance. So we can start by identifying any API requests that have longer response times. These are going to be our prime targets for optimization. And next, we can actually dial in more granular and take a look to see what kind of functions in there are causing these issues. So for example, if we have an API that involves multiple steps, maybe we're like fetching users and we're processing that data, we can start to take a look what's going on in there and ask ourselves, can we implement things like caching? Or is there any steps that we can eliminate or optimize? So based on this analysis, we can come up with some actionable items, such as optimizing queries or implementing caching solutions to reduce those response times.
So beyond optimizing API requests, there are several targeted strategies we can employ to enhance the performance of an application, right? One is large table management. So adhering to established best practices that cater to specifically handling large amounts of data effectively can really impact how data is stored and retrieved. One of those very important tools at our disposal is indexing, which is a tool from PostgreSQL, and it's available in Xano. This essentially optimizes data retrieval, making it much faster, especially as you grow and scale. I want to point out we have a lot of resources to help you decide and how to implement indexing. Another one is add-ons, which is a unique feature in Xano. And it actually enriches responses of related database tables, so you can sort of grab everything in one response, minimizing your need to continuously make database requests, which the more you have, the more taxing that could potentially be on your resources and be a bottleneck.
And other things that we can do are implementing caching. So this technique is particularly useful if you have data that is not changing very often. So by caching these responses, our application can serve up that data almost instantly without having to repeatedly process the same request. Also, rate limiting on APIs is very crucial. It helps prevent server overload by controlling how often a user can make requests. This is going to be essential for maintaining system stability, especially during those peak traffic periods. And all of these strategies not only improve performance, but also enhance scalability and reliability of our application. So now let's talk about some of the proactive measures that you can take when it comes to scaling. First of all, it is just important to have a solid understanding of any underlying issues. We do have some pretty comprehensive documentation on troubleshooting, and this can guide you through some of the common performance issues and also outlines some of the recommended solutions.
Another thing is observability and monitoring. So it's a very effective strategy when assessing areas of improvement of your application. You might be familiar with monitoring, or at least intuitively. This is like setting up things like alerts or notifications on maybe specific APIs or areas of improvement. Observability is a little more abstract. It's like getting eyes and ears on everything across your application. So you can actually figure out what bottlenecks you're not sure are existed and actually apply monitoring to that. So one effective tool to leverage this in a no-code space is NC Scale. We have a direct integration with them. So you can set up things like Slack notifications or emails in case there is an issue, so you can quickly address it and respond to it. Tied to that is that request history observations and analysis. So what patterns or bottlenecks are there that might be affecting performance? And then another one is user feedback, right? So putting on more of that business hat. What are your users saying about your application that maybe the data alone isn't uncovering? It's very important as well to make sure you're addressing that.
Absolutely. And if you find any of these steps overwhelming, or if you have a very specific challenge that requires more expertise, reaching out to support is going to be key. Our support team at Cieno is always ready to provide assistance to ensure that your application is performing at its best. So yeah, and these steps, starting out with these steps, like leveraging NC Scale, reviewing troubleshooting documentation, continuous monitoring, assessing user feedback and request history, are all going to set a strong foundation to make sure that your application is performing at its best.
Awesome. So yeah, we covered, what scaling is, the types of scaling, when to think about it, and some strategies and best practices. There's not necessarily a one size fit all. Different things might apply to your application depending on your specific use cases. But hopefully this is, a foundation so you can start to think about those. And I really want to emphasize that last point on that last slide. Just talk to us. We're here to partner with you, advise you. We realize not everyone is a DevOps expert. So reach out to us and we'll help try and figure out, the best solution for you. So thank you all for your time, and we'll do questions now.